Hey everyone, welcome to the 346th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a very silly show for you. Actually, we were just being silly before the show. We're going to have a very serious show for you today. We're going to be talking about, my gosh, another energy tech acquisition, this time by a security company in the smart home. We've got, more acquisitions. Level Home made one and raised a lot of money. We'll talk about why. Oracle has some really good data on enterprise IoT demand. Viasat, back on the acquisition front, is buying Inmarsat. We'll talk about satellite IoT connectivity. And in smaller news, Kevin's going to share an app he found and plans to review, but we thought we'd let y'all know about it before we even started reviewing it. And we've got a new gadget from Wise because, it's a day. And our kitchen gadgets are becoming smarter, and I love to see it. Plus, we're going to be talking about gift ideas for your friends and family for the holidays. We're also going to hear from our very special sponsor, twice even.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. And our guest this week is Karen Lightman, who is the executive director at the Metro 21 Smart Cities Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. And we're going to be talking about the big infrastructure bill, the $1.2 trillion passage of that bill, and what it means for smart cities, broadband, IoT in general. Okay, but first, let's hear from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Very. Very is a fully distributed IoT engineering firm that partners with its clients to build systems for smart manufacturing, smart energy, utilities, consumer electronics, and connected wellness. You should discover what Very's multidisciplinary teams can do for you at www.verypossible.com/services. Okay, Kevin. Big story of the week, I guess, is ADT is acquiring SunPro Solar for $825 million.
Yowza.
I know. This is after last week's Ecobee being purchased by Generac, the generator maker, for $770 million. So it's a lot of money, and these deals are similar, but different. Basically, like I said last week with the Ecobee Generac deal, what's happening is the smart home historically is focused on security. People were willing to buy security, but now people are willing to buy security in terms of energy availability and resilience. And this is a huge shift in thinking, and companies are getting ready for it. We thought this was going to happen a long time ago. I mean, all the way back in 2010, you saw Google and Microsoft invest in smart home energy systems, but that didn't pan out. And now we're seeing it happen again. So ADT is buying this. They're going to rebrand it as ADT Solar, and they're just going to give people solar power, solar panels on their roof, but they're also going to integrate it with the smart home, which is less about, I would say, integrating it with things like your smart doorbells and access, and more about integrating it with your large energy consuming appliances, like your HVAC system, your electric vehicle, dryers, stoves, the big stuff.
You said last week with the Ecobee Generac deal that, there's probably going to be more of these deals, and obviously there has been one. It's interesting to me personally because in 2011, I put 41 solar panels on my house, and I was able to monitor all the information through microinverters from Enphase. So those inverters changed from the DC solar panel to AC, and then gave me all the information through a website and so on. And I had looked into battery storage, and that was the missing piece of the puzzle for me. But back then, it was way too costly. Now, the way battery prices have dropped tremendously, and we've had new technologies that you don't use lead acid batteries anymore. Many people did back then. I could see now being the time to continue with more of these deals. It just makes sense. And also, it might not have made sense until the battery storage piece of the puzzle could be fit in here. So that's why I don't think we saw a lot of these deals beforehand. But
I also think demand is changing. So I think consumers are ready to spend on this for a couple reasons. One, we talked about it last week. Climate change is definitely increasing uncertainty about our ability to have consistent electricity in our homes, right? 2, we're adding many more electrical appliances and, we need to manage them rather than just wholesale upgrade everything, your circuits from like a 200 amp circuit to a 400 amp circuit. That's a lot of money and probably not necessary if you could manage it. And then the third thing is a lot of people went home during the pandemic, and suddenly if you lose power in your home, you've lost productivity. So I think we're going to see employers look at resiliency and maybe even offer rebates or funding for that, right? For their employees who work remotely.
Yeah. I mean, because in the past, pre-pandemic, if you were in the office and you had an outage at home for half an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, maybe you're concerned about a sump pump or, something happening to your home. Sure. But you're still productive. So that's a really good point. Just to close the loop on this, when I had first looked at doing batteries way back when, it would have been tens of thousands of dollars, and it wouldn't have even given me like a full day's worth of power to the point where I could recharge the next day. Now I can buy 5 kilowatt hours of lithium ion batteries for, I think it was $3,000 for 5 kilowatt hours. It's not enough to get me through a day, but I mean, it's a fraction of what it was before.
Oh, yeah. And let's break this down, because last week you said something really smart, which was, hey, you're going to need one place to manage it all. And
yes.
But let's talk about what we've got to manage. So there's generation in terms of like solar panels, most usually. There's storage. So there's going to be battery options. I think there's management at the breaker panel or within the individual devices themselves, like for demand response kind of management.
Yep.
And then there is, I don't know, what is it? There's more appliances that are smarter. So there's all of those things coming together. We're going to have to create standards between the appliances and the demand response. So a company like Span might be doing that, or you might see that with like Sense, which Schneider Electric works with, and Schneider makes electrical panels. So you could see that kind of happening. Generac seems to be doing something on the storage and the management side because they bought a company called Nurio, and on the device side. So they're going, all three of those. And then ADT, they're doing kind of the management possibly and the generation. So this is kind of fun. I like thinking about it.
When I looked at batteries recently, I also looked at some inverters and controllers that would accept solar panel power as input, then convert it and put it into your home through the breaker box, or send out to the grid if you're overproducing. It's smart enough to do that. These controllers are getting smarter all the time. There's ways that you can say, I want to take energy from the grid and not use my batteries, maybe recharge my batteries or run my appliances off them because maybe I'm on an off-peak rate or something like that. So some of that's being built in, but most of the actual management of what's a priority device is done mechanically, so to speak, through a secondary breaker box where you hook up certain circuits that you always want on. So if we can do that through some protocol or some standards without a breaker box itself, a secondary, that would be useful.
That's what Span actually does. They separated the control plane and the data plane in the breaker box, which, if I do a big story about technology in the last 50 years, maybe 30, I think it's still going to happen, is separating your control and data plane. But that's super nerdy. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about Level Home. Level Home makes a connected lock. This lock is notable for a couple reasons. One, it's freaking pretty. It looks just like any normal lock. And 2, it is designed to be an internet connected lock in the sense that it fits in an existing deadlock bolt space. Deadbolt lock space? Good Lord.
Yes, the deadbolt chamber.
Thank you.
Sure, that's why I'm here.
And it's made of a light alloy, so the motor doesn't have to push as hard. So a lot of the existing, like the Schlage, the Kwikset, a lot of them are designed like to just move the existing kind of deadbolt apparatus, and it takes a bigger motor, it takes more power. Level was like, let's do away with all that. Let's change the format entirely inside. And that's what they did. It's a nice lock. It's expensive. It's like they can range from about $200 to $330. So it's big. But they just raised $100 million, and they also acquired a company called Dwello in an all-stock deal. in Dwello, it's a company that manages smart apartments. They make services for software services for like access control and things like that for apartment buildings. With this deal, Level is doing two things. One, it's getting into the smart apartment business. And two, it's acquiring a source of recurring revenue from that SaaS business that will help sustain it, even as it sells hardware into the consumer market. So I think this is pretty clever because we all know, we've all seen companies like fail to account for ongoing costs of connected devices, right? And then if they're not successful or they're too successful, it can be really hard for them to make money. Even Wise was like, yeah, we had to introduce recurring revenue to even get investment. So good for them. They found a way to do that without coming back to people and being like, hey, I know you bought our lock for $200 or $300, but now we want to charge you a monthly fee. It's also hard to charge a monthly fee on a lock. I mean,
well, it doesn't make sense, I don't think, at an individual homeowner level, but far more valuable at a multi-family dwelling unit, an apartment, et cetera.
Oh, yeah. Access control is huge. I mean, just think about all the keys they have to deal with and replace this way.
Exactly. And the nice thing is, I mean, it's quote unquote invisible because from the outside, you can't tell. It doesn't look like a different deadbolt. And that's kind of nice on an apartment or a house for that matter. Also, what's interesting to me is these all got firmware updates to work with Amazon Sidewalk back in May that was announced. So I wonder how much of a footprint that expands Sidewalk once they start putting these in apartments.
Well, right now there's just Bluetooth. So they'll have to have a bridge or something. I mean, they do offer a bridge, but yes, I'll say yes. I'll just go with yes.
I'll go with yes.
Sure. And let's see, what else to know about this deal? Oh, I also think it's important because it's part of this wave of like smart home hardware startups that were in one space, kind of like Ecobee. I know they tried to expand, but that didn't work out so well, that are getting purchased. So I'm trying to think of the remainder of like smart home service companies out there that they're big, but are they enough to be a standalone company? And the big ones that come to mind are things like Eve. I mean, remember Canary? Canary's still floating around out there. You know what?
Are they?
Yeah, they're still there. I don't think, I mean.
I don't use their service anymore, but I still have one of the cameras. Two of them, actually.
Oh, there you go.
That's what I used to use.
So, like, there are definitely still companies that are, I don't know if I would throw Nanoleaf in there. There's companies like Senglid. I mean, they're all on the lighting side, but I just don't know. Anyway, this is Level seeing that trend, I guess, raising a lot of money to get ahead of it and maybe like become a buyer. I could see them buying a company like Deco or somebody with the hardware. That's another thing. They really want to integrate the hardware and the software experience together. And that's their differentiator on the apartment side compared to companies like SmartRent, Latch, RealPage, all of those guys. I mean, I would expect this from them. They're both former Apple engineers or Apple executives. So, that's a very Apple-y thing to think.
The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Wah, wah. Okay. You ready to talk about enterprise IoT adoption?
My favorite topic.
Woo! This is probably a report from your favorite company, everyone's favorite company, Oracle. All right, Oracle worked together with Transforma to create a report about enterprise IoT adoption. And you know what? It's actually a really good report. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to link to it. You're going to want to click on this if this is your business because it does a nice job of saying, hey, this is like what's real. Because we spend a lot of time talking about things that are like coming. And they're like, yeah, let's talk about the real. And the real here
it's kind of funny for a company like Oracle to do that. And then we try and talk about what's coming. That's all. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Well, Oracle. Yeah. Let's not talk about Oracle too much. Let's get through this report. Basically, the biggest news I took away from this, well, I took a lot of things away from this, but some of the biggest news from this is enterprises are no longer chilling and like demanding custom-built IoT offerings. They are now ready for off-the-shelf IoT offerings, which means that it will be so much easier to sell into enterprises because they're no longer like, I think this is both an admission that like with COVID-19, they had some very real problems to solve, like remote working, counting people. They had a real problem to solve. So they were able to narrow down what they needed to solve those problems as opposed to doing this big, like cool horizontal IoT play. So I think that's a smart development. Of the 800 decision makers polled, nearly 2/3 would opt for an off-the-shelf IoT solution. And that's a big shift. And 75% of the respondents, they wanted their connectivity to be baked in and part and offered by the solution provider, they didn't want to call like AT&T and get anything.
We've actually talked about quite a few of those products, those chipsets with built-in connectivity and the plans with you buy the hardware and it includes 10 years of data up to 500 meg. So we've kind of seen that happening already. And it does make total sense. These companies may not have the expertise and the time and effort to figure out what connectivity they need, how much it's going to cost, integrating it in. They shouldn't have to deal with that. You don't do that with your phone. You buy a phone and it connects.
Although this is a little bit more interesting, I think, is kind of a tweak on the phone market. They're saying in this survey that they don't want to pay per megabyte, or gigabyte on their connectivity. They want to pay per message. So remember all the way back in the day when you got charged like a quarter each time someone texted you, and we're like, let's not do that anymore. Well, they're still in the quarter per text mode in the enterprise software world. And it does make sense. So, because you can build that into whatever service that you're offering.
That actually lines up with their third topic or best practice.
Which is?
Well, it's work out what you need to do with your data. I mean, it's great that you have all this data, but you don't want to get it all and then try and figure out what you're going to do with it. I would add something, and this goes back to the messaging and the costs for connectivity. I would say determine what data you actually need and only get that data. Why pay for all this excess data that you don't need? You could always add later.
Yeah. And then you don't have to store it. You don't have to manage it. You don't have to deal with auditing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Unsurprisingly, since this is Oracle, a big portion of this deals with data. And some of the more interesting things, this talks about 80% of IoT projects involve bidirectional data flows, which is pretty subtle. You and I probably know this, Kevin. We're like, yes, because you've got, command, and then you've got the state that needs to come back. So at its most basic level, that makes 100% sense. But a lot of people are now saying, hey, you know what? We're going to be doing control loop settings where the bidirectional data is going to be acted on and no one's going to get in the way of that. And so this is an increasing level of sophistication that they're going to have control loop that's going to be managed by an enterprise application or by the IoT platform. And we're not there yet. Only a quarter of companies are actually doing something like that today on the enterprise side. But there's a lot of hope there. There's, again, a ton of really good pieces of data here, including some favorites like, hey, we talk a lot about digital twins, but very few people are actually interested in digital twins right now, which totally makes sense. That's a future thing that we get all excited about. So yeah, go check this out. If you're in this space, if you're just listening to us because you like your smart home, then, perhaps this is not for you. But
I'm not in this space and you sent it to me.
Yeah, that's because you have to talk about it with me. Boo.
Okay.
But now let's talk about satellites. Space. Viasat is buying Inmarsat for $7.3 billion. And now this is not all an IoT deal. This is both an IoT and a broadband from space deal, right? SpaceX really launched that category. Amazon's doing their Kuiper satellite system. So there's a lot, but that's all broadband for the most part. But what is happening is in this deal, part of the focus that Viasat's going to be doing is focusing on IoT. And Inmarsat does have its new Elera satellite system that is providing IoT connectivity. So that's narrowband connectivity, small data rights. One of the first customers of that is Hive, which is a European company that provides not connectivity. Again, thanks, Oracle. The connectivity is baked into their sensor solution, and they're doing that on oil rigs and places that need that sort of thing. So this is not, satellite companies, they go bankrupt, they merge, they unmerge, this is continuous evolution here. So take with this, what it is. Satellites are expensive to operate. You've got a constant stream of maintenance and continuous launches to keep your constellation up in the air. These are not the small satellites. These are big, honkin' satellites. And even with the smaller satellites coming on board, we're still seeing the market try to meet up with the actual demand. And that's always tough in the satellite world. I'll link to a story I wrote about it because I don't feel like explaining it in depth here.
Yeah, you don't just flip a switch and say, I'm going to launch a satellite today.
And then, you've got to, once you've got the connectivity, you've got to build the market. But by the time you're done building the market, your satellites have fallen back to Earth or failed. So you've got to use the money that you've got to launch more to keep the market growing. It's hard.
Sounds like a good business plan.
It's tough. That's why they always go bankrupt.
It's tough. It's very much based on timing. And again, getting all of the governmental agencies to sign off on having the satellite up there, using whatever bandwidth and spectrum, et cetera. It's not easy. And then physically getting access to something that can launch it. Granted, that's moving quickly now with things like SpaceX and such, but
Space catapults.
It's not a quick process. It's funny you say that because I just saw a video of a first successful launch of a suborbital small rocket, but it's actually slung from the Earth. It rotates. They built something. I think it's called Sling something. It literally just today I saw it.
Wow.
I forget the name of it, but
all right.
Yeah. They sling it up high enough and then the rockets kick in.
All right. Space catapults for the win. Let's talk about HomeKit users, a new app, an existing app.
Well, it's new to me. So I apologize for being late on this one for HomeKit people who already know about it. And what I'm going to do is I am going to review this, but it crossed my radar. It's called Controller for HomeKit. It looks like the Apple Home app on steroids to me, and I mean that in a very good way. It's up to version 5.4 now, so obviously it's been around for a while. But just some high-level features real quick. It has advanced automations, which look really cool. You can get the vendor characteristics from all your devices instead of just the standard characteristics that Apple Home provides. It has backup and restoring of your HomeKit setup. It will store all of your HomeKit QR codes on your phone or your tablet. Of course, you can always print those out if you ever need to scan those again. You don't have the code, or you don't want to climb up on a ladder like I had to last weekend to re-add a garage door controller. It's got a total customization interface, so you can set up the home experience your way and just say, just show me my cameras, and it shows you all your cameras. It's got smart folders. It's got logs of everything that happens, workflows that are like super routines, and even some maintenance things that will give you information about low batteries, something wasn't reachable, missing a HomeKit code, etc. So long story short, it looks amazing. There is a free version. I think I'm going to pay for the pro version, which might be $30 for a year. And I'm going to do a review on this because it looks absolutely awesome.
Sweet. All right. I can't wait for that. Other little bits of news. Wyze has a camera floodlight. Should we buy it?
You sound thrilled.
This is a floodlight camera for outdoor use. It includes a Wyze Cam version 3. It is $84.99 plus shipping. It's got 2 lights, motion sensing.
Yeah, color night vision, I should say, 270-degree motion detection.
It does require a cord.
It does. You can either run one through your wall or through a window or however you want to do it. You need to put power to it.
Yeah. So, I don't need this, but if you do, it's out there. GE, Smart Kitchen News. GE Profile has launched turkey mode ahead of the Thanksgiving season. And basically, if you own a connected GE Profile oven, you will get a software update over the air that basically lets you put your temperature probe in the turkey. You tell it it's a turkey, and it will handle all the logistics of cooking that turkey for you. What does this remind you of, Kevin?
I was just going to say, that sounds like a feature we have in our June ovens.
Exactly. And this is where it's really important to say, oh my gosh, y'all, software is the name of the game, and the hardware just has to be compatible and able to update your hardware. Like June came out with this really expensive, innovative, beautiful oven with freaking GPU inside for image recognition. And what's happened is we're seeing this filter down to the lower end of the market via a software update and basically us telling the oven, hey, this is what's inside. So it takes
I was just going to say, they've caught up from a algorithmic cooking standpoint in some cases, but
yeah, it's still not as cool. I still love my
right. Well, because the June, for people who don't know, has a camera mounted inside it in the top, and it has a recognition database to recognize food. So once it sees it's a turkey or whatever other food you have that's in the database, it will just say, oh, it's a turkey. And you put the thermometer in, you say, cook the turkey, and it just does exactly what the new GE features does. You don't have to tell it to do that.
So I just bought a new oven with Wi-Fi.
Oh.
I bought a GE Cafe oven. It's in an induction range. It's an oven/induction range. So because of all the shipping delays, that won't arrive until January. But I will have access to some of the GE cooking stuff. So I'll be eager to try that out and see what's happening. So
I would be very curious to hear your experience as a June owner, having that comparison, because I don't think I would ever replace my oven. Because we love the June.
I needed a real oven. My oven in the house that I bought was terrible. Just really terrible. Like, just bad. And the range is terrible. So we were just like, nah.
The June is the most used item in our kitchen.
Oh, yeah. 100% ours, too. I mean, it's ridiculous. We use that thing 2 or 3 times a day still. I've worn out one June. I had to get another.
As have I. But we paid $1,500, $1,600 for the first models. Now they're down to $600.
Yeah. And, again, taking it down market. Okay. Let's talk about gifts. The June was actually one of our gift guide gifts many years ago. We've been doing this for a long time. And this year felt a little rocky. So I came at this, I was feeling really overwhelmed by the number of junked gadgets and the amount of work I had to put into my gadgets working. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to send people off on a list to buy a bunch of stuff that just might end up in a landfill, right?
Well, requires too much homework.
Yeah. And unless that's your jam, go for it. So we tried to think of some slightly more sustainable, maybe more practical things. Again, with climate change, the pandemic, it felt hard to recommend frivolous gifts this year. So, I'll link to our gift guide, but we have things on there. So we put in an external battery from a company called EcoFlow. We put in an air purifier from Filtrete. We added 2 books, one on Android, one on cybersecurity. And all of this was an effort to, try to make it less, I know y'all love gadgets, stressful and gadget focused, because gadgets right now are just feeling not like a good thing. And here's a thought, grab some subscriptions for people, especially if you're doing last minute stuff, given the supply chain issues. So I wanted to talk about those, but I also wanted to just think of some things that maybe Kevin and I have purchased over the years that are connected that made good gifts, or anything, Kevin, that you're like, oh, I should throw this in there.
Yeah. I mean, I put things in there that I use or have a lot of value, get a lot of value from. And I think your subscription idea is a really good one, because a lot of people do buy these connected devices, but don't get the subscriptions because maybe they're just a little too much at the time. I'm spending $600 on a June oven. Why do I need to pay X dollars for this? It doesn't mean those people didn't want them. They just didn't feel it was worth the money to spend the money, but it would be a nice to have. So maybe people have connected gadgets that they don't have the subscriptions for, but could use or might want. So if you know what they have, that's a possible easy gift choice, I think.
One caveat for that. I went around to about 5 companies before just giving up, and it is impossible right now to buy a subscription to smart home stuff for somebody else.
Because everything's tied to an email or something. Yes.
Yes. And, the most positive response I got was from a spokesperson at Google was like, that's actually a pretty good idea. Maybe next year.
I was just going to say, we talk almost weekly about these hardware companies trying to increase their subscription revenues. Well, make it easier. Make it so that you can gift those.
Yeah. So, this isn't happening this year, but if you go and buy, and I know we hate this, right? But here's the deal. Buy a Visa or MasterCard for the amount of the annual subscription or the 6 months or whatever subscription you want to give. I wanted to give someone a Peloton subscription, but that was not an option. But wrap that up with if you're doing a Peloton, wrap it up with a water bottle or a towel, or, if I were doing a Nest Aware subscription for someone, I'd probably wrap it up with an ornament of a home, or maybe a candle or something. I don't know, something that feels home and secure. And I would write down this gift card is for blah, blah, blah. I thought you could use this. The nice thing is, if they don't want it, then they automatically have cash, but you're trying to not give cash, which a lot of people get sad about. So I don't know. That's a thing. But I also wanted to say one of the most successful gifts I've ever given, and I talk about this all the time, but I'm going to talk about it now, just in case you missed it, was I gave my mom 2 years ago an Ember coffee mug because she is always reheating her coffee. And she freaking loves that thing. She uses it literally every day. I think she probably imbibes more hot toddies because she now has a way to keep them hot all the time during the winter.
I was skeptical when you first mentioned Ember, the mug, a couple of years back. But since then, I've seen people just raving and raving about it.
People love that thing. So it's like $99. This year, there are just especially a lot of non-Ember branded coffee mugs that keep your coffee mugs hot. But, y'all, if it's possibly on your radar, just get it. It's a good dad gift too, I think. So other gifts that seemed fun or, I don't know, that made you excited, Kevin?
I've been raving about the Nano Leaf lines, which I know you're going to mention shortly because that's our prize for one of the people who call in this month to the IoT podcast hotline. I do think they're more appealing to more people than the other
the
Nano
elements
Leafs.
Or the canvas.
So that was good. And is this the first year we put books on there? I know it's the first year I did.
It's the first year we put books on there. Yeah.
Okay. And I read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy books, so I was going to struggle, I figured. However, I had just decided to read an amazing book. It looked amazing and it was amazing. And it was all about how the Android operating system came to be, basically the whole first year of Android 1.0. And it's all behind the scenes interviews. And I learned so much about the dynamics of what it takes to put something like that together. And when you think about it, if you do read it, you'll be amazed that they pulled it off and how they pulled it off. And it is now like the most used mobile platform in the world. It's just phenomenal.
And like half of the IoT is on this thing too.
Yeah.
So I'm going to recommend not buying the new Wise scale for any loved ones, even though it is cheap and new and awesome. Just don't do it. Nobody wants a scale for their holidays.
True. I got mom an iron.
Yeah, no connected irons. I will say, though, a smart vac is not a bad idea. I love my little Roomba, the EcoVacs, and all of those. That's a nice gift idea. There's also trackers. Trackers are a great stocking stuffer, just in the sense there's the new AirTags we put on our list, but you could also get the new tiles for people who are not Apple owners.
The robotic vacuum, I was skeptical of them to a point. I had the first Roomba years and years ago, but the battery technology, again, didn't last long and so on. Stacey, have you ever looked to see the statistics of your robot? I check and see the total square footage it's covered in its lifetime, but more importantly, how many hours it is run to clean, which granted we could clean faster than it, but I still look at it as a big time savings.
I have not looked at that. I know it's a big time savings because I have a dog and I have a bed that it sleeps under. So I love it just because it gets under the bed and I can't. And we vacuum the bedroom every day because, living in the Pacific Northwest, we've got like pine needles all over the place and it gets on the dog and the dog goes everywhere. So yeah.
I think it's one of those things you don't appreciate until you have it and understand how much time it saves you.
Yeah, I'm guessing so. I'm like, I hadn't thought it. I appreciate it just because it's an adorable little robot that runs around and picks stuff up. Yay. All right. That's a bit on the gift side. As I encounter things, I will let y'all know. I was looking for a good wearable. I didn't find anything that sparked joy, as it were. I will say if you've got someone in your life and they don't want to have a screen, the Mighty Audio is still a device that I use after 4 years of having it. And this is a $99 MP3 player. It syncs from Spotify. I think they have one now that syncs from Apple Music too. And you just load your playlist on that and it has Bluetooth or it's got a headphone jack and you could just go running, or I think they have a waterproof one for swimming, but you don't have to have your whole phone with you. You just have this 1.5 by 1.5 inch square that you bring with you.
It's like one of the old iPod Nano looking things, and you just clip it on. It's literally just big enough to have the scroll wheel, which is, really 4 or 5 buttons. It's $109 for their latest one. It's Spotify and Amazon Music, not Apple.
Sorry. Thank you.
But it's okay. No, a lot of people subscribe to Amazon Music or whatever. That's fine.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I still use it. I use it more in the summer because in winter I have coats, but like in the summer, I'll just like pop that on and just wander out, without having to bring a bulky phone with me. That's a good option for somebody who might be like me. Okay. I said there was enough gifts. Enough gifts. Let's now go to the Internet of Things podcast hotline. This is the section of the show where we take questions from you. And if you want to give us a call with a question or an opinion, you can reach us at 512-623-7424. And if you do that, you will be entered to win this month's prize, which is actually one of our gift guide items, the NanoLeaf lines. It is a starter kit and an extra 3 panels or 3 lines.
Correct.
Yeah. So pretty sweet gift, toy, or whatever you want it to be. So just give us a call at 512-623-7424. And it's important to know that this week's podcast hotline is sponsored by Blues Wireless. Blues Wireless makes something called the Note Card. This is a cellular and GPS-enabled device-to-cloud data system on a module. Basically, connectivity on a card. Each note card comes packaged with 500 megabytes of data that's usable for over 10 years for $69 or less. The connectivity is globally available in more than 136 countries, and you can learn more at blues.io. So if you're building a connected device, popping one of these things in there gets you basic sensor connectivity for as long as you might need it at a really set low price. Thanks, Blues. All right. This week's call is from Lisa. Let's hear it.
I am a person that although I understand why, I really hate to see Facebook drop facial recognition. And that is because for a lot of people who are visually impaired, of which I am one, they've pioneered in the field of image recognition. And it's really helpful for me when someone posts a picture to know whether I'm in it, who else is in it with me. And I realize that we don't want to throw the whole world's security away for a small subset of people. But I'm wondering what alternatives, is there an alternative? Could we somehow regulate things in a way that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak? And probably not, but I just wish we could explore that. I do think facial recognition is here to stay in one form or another. The people that want the information are going to get it. And whatever I put on Facebook, I figure I don't mind anybody from my grandmother to my president seeing, or I'm not going to post it. So I think we need to be a little more responsible for what we post. But having said that, we're going down a slippery slope. I understand that. But so I have mixed feelings about that, but I'm going to be kind of bummed out when they stop telling me who's in my pictures. They still describe the pictures. It's nice to know when somebody posts a Facebook post that says, "Rest in peace, Chuck," and my phone says image of a dog. I at least know I don't have to call and console them over their husband or something. But so that will still be there. But I'm going to hate to see facial recognition go away. You can tag your own photos, but even I'm not going to do that. Nobody's going to take the time to do that. And I'm kind of looking forward to the day when I can recognize almost anybody with my phone and just know who's walking up to me so I can say hi to them and actually know who I'm talking to. But like I said, I understand the privacy concerns there, and I hope we don't totally give up on the whole idea, although I don't know how we can make that all work. Sorry if I was too long-winded. Love your show. Thanks. Bye-bye.
This is more of a take. I don't have, a lot to say other than, yeah, I feel you, Lisa. This is not something we considered.
I'm very appreciative that Lisa called in to share this perspective, because it's not that we do it on purpose, that we overlook a certain segment of the population when it comes to using devices. It's just we don't have the perspective. We don't have the experience. We don't think about these things when we're talking about something for 5 minutes. So I'm glad that she brought it up. And there's definitely a value add for people like Lisa with the whole Facebook facial recognition and other similar types of services. It gets tricky because I understand how she is okay with having her image tagged and so other people can know, but are all of the other people. Now, I guess you could say to your friends, if you're Lisa, can you make sure that you tag who's in photos so that I know? Or maybe there's a way that Facebook could compromise and say, look, we will enable the facial recognition feature for people who have proven, say, a medical reason that it helps with their accessibility and so on and so forth. And people have opted in to have their faces recognized by us. I mean, there may be ways, I don't know, but it's a really challenging concept to deal with.
What makes it more challenging, I think, for something like Facebook is people are used to being private in private spaces. In Facebook, people will, if you're at a party, then someone can take a picture with you in the background, and if Facebook automatically tags you based on a background photo that you may not be aware of having it happen, then suddenly you could be outed for whatever reasons, right? So I think there's probably a way to do this where either people opt out, like, again, we've talked about this on previous podcasts, this idea of creating like a signal for like the IoT or the computing around you to be like, hey, I'm in incognito mode. So please don't, maybe it's because you called in sick for work, or maybe it's because there's a segment of your life you don't want to be tracked in, right? And you just want to be incognito there. Maybe there'd be a way to do something like that. I would love for better technology in that sphere, but I get it. I appreciate the need for it. I would love for us to figure out a way. I think right now it's going to be clunky just because I think you're going to have to ask your friends to opt in or tag themselves for you. But hopefully the people you care most about would do that. I know that's not ideal.
We're not going to solve the problem. I mean,
I thought this was a good perspective to add. So that's why we put it in here, because I was like, oh, yeah, let's think about that. All right. Well, that concludes this segment of the show. But remember, if you would like to enter to win the Nanoleaf lines, give us a call at 512-623-7424. And now, please stay tuned for our guest. This week's guest is Karen Lightman, and we're going to be talking about the infrastructure bill and smart cities. But first, a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Very. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Very, a leading IoT engineering firm, and I have Bill Flaherty here, who is the hardware practice lead at Very, ready to talk to us. All right, Bill, so I understand that your team has a fairly unique approach to hardware development. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right, Stacy. Most hardware development practices are decades old, and while software development practices have evolved, hardware is mostly stuck in the 20th or even 19th centuries. Instead of accepting the status quo, we've got a new way of doing things, agile hardware development.
All right, agile hardware development. That sounds interesting, but what does that actually mean?
Well, just like for software, agile hardware focuses on encouraging tight team collaboration, constant interaction with the customer, and being receptive to change, rather than tied to a requirements document. We focus on designing and prototyping small bites of work instead of trying to engineer the whole system all at once. That allows us to iterate quickly, identify issues sooner, and get to market faster.
Excellent. So Very is a 100% remote company. How does that work with hardware development?
We have advanced hardware labs in each engineer's home. That means we can build a prototype for clients quickly and efficiently. We can build, break, and repair hardware on a very rapid cadence.
Oh, so you're breaking hardware on purpose?
Yes. When a large hardware prototype fails after years of development, it can be both financially and emotionally devastating for the team. The difference with Agile is that we're building and breaking hardware early and often. Then we use that feedback to improve the design while the product is still in development. That may sound pricey, but over the long run, it'll save the organization money. It's kind of like the difference between a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage and a balloon mortgage. If you invest in breaking hardware prototypes early and often, you won't have that huge bill come due at the end of the project.
Nice. All right, Bill. Where do I go to learn more about how Very can help me with my IoT project?
You can reach out to us at verypossible.com/Stacy. That's VERY possible.com/STACEY.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacy Higginbotham, and today's guest is Karen Lightman, who is the executive director of the Metro 21 Smart Cities Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. Hello, Karen. How are you today?
I'm excellent, Stacy. Thank you so much for having me with you today.
I am really excited because we have this big infrastructure bill to talk about. Again, we're going to be talking about smart cities, and I don't know what else we're going to talk about. Maybe some semiconductors because, we both love it. So let's kick this off first by letting people know what the heck the Metro 21 Smart Cities Institute is and what it's there for.
So Metro 21 Smart Cities Institute, what we do is we collaborate with our equity and municipal partners that have identified real world problems like air quality or landslides or whatever it is. And we use technology that's researched and developed at Carnegie Mellon, and we deploy it in collaboration with those partners to help them solve real world problems and improve quality of life for all citizens. Excellent. And so y'all have been working locally on some smart city initiatives. Do you want to tell me about any of those before we get started? Absolutely. An example of a project that I'm most proud of most recently is it was originally a project on optimizing bus routes for non-public school kids in the region. And then during the pandemic, it became clear at the beginning that buses weren't that big of an issue because the kids were remote. But the issue was these kids that normally would get free breakfast and lunch weren't attending school, so they weren't getting those meals. So we quickly collaborated with about 20 partners, nonprofits, for-profits, government agencies, to help develop an algorithm that informed a route to deliver meals to families in need. And we helped deliver regionally. We're part of a group that delivered over 1 million meals in the first few months of the pandemic. That is so awesome. And I love the fact that you're like not pushing technology and like, oh, where will this work? But you're like, oh, here's a problem. Let's use tech to solve it. So you're here this week because the House passed the infrastructure bill recently. There's still more happening. Maybe there will be a social safety net and climate policy bill happening. But for now, we've got a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that has passed. And a big part of that is broadband, a lot to do with transportation and utilities. So let's talk about what this might mean for... Well, let's just talk about what it might mean for the infrastructure of the country broadly. I mean, first of all, it's finally Infrastructure Week, right? It's like the bad jokes that we had for 4 years. And now this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I think what's exciting is, I really do believe in that Build Back Better, because we have the technology. We know we have the technology. And now we can apply that technology to improve the way we build infrastructure so that when we rebuild roads, we can lay fiber and we can make sure that those roads are highly connected. And so that the next generation, we can future-proof the investments in infrastructure that maybe, honestly, if we'd had this money, if this infrastructure bill had passed 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had this level of technology to now put in place. So I feel like it's the right place, the right time, and the right amount of investment so that we can build in an intelligent way that is equitable and also addresses a lot of the inequities of previous infrastructure projects, where infrastructure projects would be used to divide communities, typically communities of color. So now we can use technology to help address issues of inequity, identify where they are, and then build the infrastructure in a way that is future-proofed so we can have a more connected, autonomous world that seeks to reduce emissions, improve safety, all those good things. One of the biggest things that will hopefully help promote equity is broadband. It's also something that will help promote smart cities because you can't have a smart city if there's no underlying broadband access there. What do you want to see in terms of the broadband funds here? How should cities think about deploying this or using this? I am so thrilled that the $65 billion for broadband stayed in there. It was actually, when I saw that the $1.2 trillion passed, I immediately searched on the word broadband to make sure that money was still in there, because I do feel like it's this level of investment that we need. And I'm hoping that it will also be a catalyst for the private sector to say, okay, the government is reducing the risk. I am willing to make investments in broadband because it is the future and it is going to create more jobs. And I think to your point that if you have, you could have all the sensor networks in the world, but if they're not connected, they're not smart. They're not going to be improving the efficiency. They're not going to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They're not going to be optimized. So Well, I'm excited for broadband for both rural and urban areas. And I want to think regionally. And I think the issue is half of Americans don't have access to broadband that's reliable and affordable. So this is going to be a game changer. It's going to allow people to have access to the internet to start a company, expand their company, apply for a job, get health care, apply for benefits, have telemedicine. Like, it's going to improve quality of life by manyfold. And I think what's exciting is that for smart cities, it'll also allow for the optimization of connected buildings, connected transportation. The most important thing, and this is where my background in MEMS, sensors and semiconductors comes in, it's got to be designed for safety, for cybersecurity. And it's got to be done at the chip level. So it cannot be, people who, for us to adopt these connected IoT worlds, it is critical that there's trust of the community. It can't be, people can't feel like they're in a surveillance state. And so actually, I'm the co-chair of the Trustworthy IoT Coalition for the World Economic Forum, because this has been something we've been working on for the past 2 years, even pre-pandemic, was this issue of technology is at a pace, but the governance of that technology there's a huge gap, especially with respect to IoT devices. There's a lot of, and so what I'm hoping now that we have this infrastructure bill, have this broadband, IoT can become more of a reality. And so it's an opportunity for companies to get out ahead of it and say, we care about safety, security, cybersecurity, and trust. And, you own your data and you decide how you want to share your data. And I'm hoping there will be more of a conversation about that, because trust is going to be really critical, because we could put all this investment into IoT, but if people feel like it's Big Brother watching them, the tech backlash could be quite severe. So I think it's what's exciting is that there's a lot of interest in this. We're getting a lot of traction, worldwide on this topic of IoT and trustworthy IoT and designing for trust. And so I feel like this is, again, it's like the perfect timing for all these things to come together.
Man, you just unloaded a lot of stuff on me, and I have to push back a little bit, because I feel like you've done two things. You've brought up security, all for it. At the chip level, we're definitely seeing that sort of thing happen, especially with new stuff. I think a big unfortunate issue for a lot of industry, for a lot of old IoT deployments, is that we can't make that secure. We're going to have to rip and replace, right? So kind of like the FCC is doing Huawei grants to help rural carriers get out of the Huawei gear because of worries about security, we're going to have to look for funds and help to get people out of old network DVR, network cameras, those kind of things. But you also brought up surveillance state and trust, which are tied to security, but are also fundamentally different. And so I would love to talk to you a little bit about that as it relates to cities, because a lot of the city deployments, people get very worried, because that is also, it's not just the city, it's the potential for the state to surveil them and act against them, which is horrifying. So let's talk about places that maybe from your work at the World Economic Forum, places that have done this well. What kind of policies should we have for that?
There's no perfect answer to this. And I think it's a work in progress. So what's interesting, at the World Economic Forum, we have countries like Singapore that are trying to get out ahead of it. Well, Singapore is not a democracy, right? So, like, their relationship with their residents and their citizens is very different than what we have in the United States. And so I think what's interesting about what's happened in smart cities is at the dawn of smart cities, say 5-6 years ago, it was like, oh my God, there's so much excitement, like Sidewalk Labs up in Toronto, this is great, it's going to be so optimized. And then there was a realization, oh, wait a minute, you're going to be surveilling me, you're going to be analyzing and tracking me, but I should trust you. So, and there was that backlash against, and for many reasons. It wasn't just that reason that Sidewalk Labs pulled out of Toronto. And I think there is like the shine, the luster off of smart cities has dulled. And I think what people are saying is, what does it mean? Like, what is smart cities? And I think that's the thing where I want to push back is smart cities. Yes, it can have facial recognition, but that's not what smart cities are about. I want a smart city that is thinking and is respecting people's is building trust, is respecting people's agency, but at the same time is being transparent about what it's surveilling, what it's not. Also investing in technologies that are not identifying people like personal identifiable information, which you can do. And you can be more thoughtful and intentional about how you are monitoring and people counting and things like that. I want to fight back for the smart cities because I want it to be thoughtful and intentional. And I know that technology exists to help inform that. But to your point, there is a lot of legacy technology, surveillance, for example, that is not privacy preserving. So I'm hoping that we can, like, companies would want to differentiate themselves by saying, and communities saying, we're going to preserve your privacy and it will be your choice. And so I'm hoping that we are moving towards that.
I am also hoping for that. So let's talk about some of the use cases for smart cities, especially those. I think there was obviously a lot of attention for smart lighting. I know that I've talked to people about security and surveillance. I mean, we have ShotSpotter and have had forever. And we've also had sidewalk furniture like Wi-Fi kiosks and weird things like that. But where do you think the big opportunity is with this infrastructure bill?
And so, first of all, smart lighting is one aspect of smart cities, right? And the only thing I'm going to plug is the work that can be done to preserve the dark sky. Okay, so that's kind of smart lighting I'm all in favor of. But when you're talking about this infrastructure bill, what I would love to see are things like investments to help improve air quality, flooding, combined sewer overflow related to flooding, greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings. So if we could improve efficiency of buildings and government buildings many times, we could really reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in urban areas. Electrifying, when infrastructure is going in, roads are being built, having broadband and fiber and as well as electrification, solar. Like, I think there's going to be, and there's huge job opportunities that are going to go with that. That's what I get excited about, is that I feel like we're going to be able to make the investment in the infrastructure, and it's done in a way that can be green, like I was saying earlier, like not just pick one. They can be green, but it can also be job creating.
And let's talk about smart transportation, because there are some wild ideas out there. I mean, I talked to up in Michigan, they're doing a roadway that's got sensors that'll like recharge your car. And if I go down to Denver, they're, using algorithms to figure out who's going to run traffic lights. I mean, there's some really cool stuff. What is probably most realistic? And if I were a city doing this, what should I be investing in? And maybe it's different for every city.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it is going to be different for every city. And I think it's going to be a question of, like, what are the real world problems? What are the pain points of your community? In Houston, it's going to be flooding and, heat and climate. In California, maybe it's issues related to wildfires, right? Or whatever it is. And, insert here. Like, for our community here in southwestern Pennsylvania, because of climate change, the climate is getting hotter and wetter. So what does that mean? It means more landslides, more infrastructure challenges, sewers, roads, bridges, all of the above. So I think for every community, they're going to have to make a decision of where to make their investment based on what are and I hope not too short-term challenges that they see ahead. And also there's an opportunity to, address some of the inequitable deployment of infrastructure from decades ago, where communities were cut off from each other, typically communities of color, by building roads and highways. But I would say each community is going to have to look at What are the critical, and then also where are the job opportunities? In this region, we're doing a lot on automation and robotics. What are the ways to optimize that for the entire region? Not just the urban core, but how do we create more connectivity through the digital and physical infrastructure?
And that makes a lot of sense. So if I am a state and I am getting this money, if I am a city and I'm getting this money, what are the things you've seen municipalities do in the past and have screwed up?
Well, I think that the challenge is, especially when it's going to come to broadband, this stuff is complicated. So I think the key thing too is there's going to need to be some policy changes. So this idea that broadband is a true utility and it should be governed as such is not standard. Right now it's not being governed as a public utility. So that's one thing that needs to change, in my opinion. The other thing is I would love to see more opportunities for cooperatives, just like we've seen sometimes in some communities for electric cooperatives, where communities have banded together to provide electricity. I would love to see the legalization, because in some places like Pennsylvania, it's not legal to have a cooperative. I would love to see that instituted, so that there are some policy changes that can be more equitable, because the private sector hasn't been making investments in rural areas, for example, because the market isn't there. So if you keep it as a market-driven investment decision, it's still not going to go to the rural communities. So you've got to find another model. So it's got to be this quasi-public model, either a cooperative or an authority, in order to make that level of investment. And that is going to require some policy changes at the state level, most likely, is where it'll be done.
Awesome. Well, Karen, thank you so much for coming on the show this week. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was great to have a conversation with you.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stacyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening, and please subscribe.